Most of us were taught to stick to scales and standard chord progressions. It's just how music has been taught for ages. Sound familiar? We've all had that one teacher who told us what we should or shouldn't do in music. I've been there too, and honestly, I was frustrated. So let's stop writing generic music and do something unique instead. Interval theory. Instead of getting caught up in scales and traditional harmony rules, interval theory is about the distance between notes. We measure these distances in half steps or chromatic steps, which works for chords and melodies. When looking at notes vertically, like in a chord, we always start from the lowest note and count up. If there are multiple intervals stacked, we just add them together using a plus sign. On the flip side, when looking at notes horizontally, like in a melody, we count the distance from one note to the next, and we can go either up or down, totally flexible. That means you can create music without being stuck in keys, scales, or the usual chord progressions. And this leads naturally to the following question. The short answer: the harmonics series helps us understand how each interval behaves. Different intervals have their own natural character and interact in unique ways with the notes around them. Before we look at some quick examples, let me ask you a question. How many different intervals do you think there are? Most people would guess there are 12 different intervals, but actually there are only 6. Here's why. An interval can appear in different positions, but still function the same way. For example, a 1 interval works just like an 11. They are the same tones, just flipped. We could explore open harmony, but to keep things simple for now, let's focus on the octave. So let's remember that we only have to deal with 6 different intervals. Everything higher is one of the 6 intervals, but flipped, just like a 1 and 11. Now here's a quick list of those 6 intervals and how they differ in their functions. The 1 is unstable and contains energy that can be set free by expanding. The 2 is dominant and wants to resolve to a new tonal center. The 3, by its nature, is consonant and defines a temporary tonal center. The 4 evokes a major tonal center but reacts beautifully to the intervals around it, so it is non-committed. The 5 is neutral and goes along with everybody. The 6 is also dominant but ambiguous. It connects strongly to bitonality and polytonality. Let's compose a quick idea with a 1 interval. As stated, the 1 is unstable and contains energy. And in fact, it wants to move to the 3 interval. This also applies to the other position. It feels really natural and gives a nice sense of release. Now, let's build on that by adding some bass notes. Sounds like a solid building block already, and it's the same movement in every bar. Now here's another quick example. It follows the same ideas, but this time I switched to the 11 interval and added a chromatic bass line. These are nice colors and flavors that got tickled out by the choice of our chromatic pattern in the bass. So let's talk about bass notes and how they move. We just learned that there are only 6 intervals. Now, we can use those intervals to create 6 different root cycles. I'm sure you know the circle of fifths. Well, that's the RC5, and we are still counting the distances in half steps between the root tones. Now, you might be wondering, why even think about root cycles? Well, music is made up of patterns, and root cycles help us build strong musical foundations. They are like little shortcuts for coming up with fresh and interesting ideas. We also combine different root cycles or switch from one to another fluently. These are great tools and concepts, but you still might ask how we bring this all to action. What we just did was the gathering phase. That's the first step in our 3-step process. Next, we move on to sketching. This is where we take our ideas and lay them out like a rough draft. Here's a quick sketch that is built entirely using intervals. The vertical structures sound cool, but they don't quite tell a compelling story yet. So let's transform them into flowing lines and play them with orchestral strings. It's the same notes from the sketch, no extra things added. And by the way, the initial root progression that I used in the piece Sinister here was based on the root cycle 4. You might want to go back and check the distances between those bass notes. With interval theory, you're not locked into typical chord sequences. You can just follow the nature of the intervals and compose freely. That also makes it a perfect tool for orchestration. And it works in all styles: classical, film scoring, jazz, and beyond. Here's a quick recap of what you know by now. In interval theory, we measure the distance between the notes, vertically and horizontally. There are only 6 different intervals. Everything higher than this is a position change. The circle of fifths is the most popular root cycle, but in total, there are 6 at our disposal. That is the RC1 to the RC6. The 3-step process is a productivity hack and helps us streamline the process of composition. The harmonic series helps us understand how intervals and interval combinations behave naturally. You can use this to create tension, dissonance, and resolution in your music. It's also a great tool for making your orchestrations sound more natural and expressive. If that all piqued your interest, please join me in one of the live free intro events that I regularly offer. It would be fantastic to connect with you. Now, have a wonderful rest of your day and happy composing. Bye.